Hey, Carol.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Tom says hello, by the way.
Well, hi back.
Okay.
I'm gonna get out of my robe and stuff, but what's your background? Where is that?
Oh, that's a mountain meadow in northern Italy where I was last year at this time. So
There you go. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, is that where you plan to be in the mountains, or did you go to the mountains as a result of everything that was happening in our world?
Well, I planned to be there, although I spent a little more time there than I'd planned to. I was in Rome for the first 4 months, 4.5 months. And then when they allowed us to move from province to province, if we had a good reason, I made my case and fled to the mountains
There
for
you
the last part of May. So,
go. Uh,
yeah.
I don't know when we'll get back there. I think Spain is going to be next. I think one of the girls will probably end up in Spain
Wow.
um, as part of Hope College. And neither of us have spent much time in Spain. So, but Brenda was not on when Trevor went and did school there. And I met him in Italy, and then he and I went off and did some adventures. Um, I want to get her up to the Amalfi Coast
Oh, yeah.
and hike between the um, what are those? You know, the five
Oh, yeah. Cinque Terre.
Cinque Terre. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
It was
I
raining
thought
the
that
day
was
we
beautiful.
planned to hike.
Yeah.
Bummer.
Yeah. Well, and the trail is not well maintained. They tell you that it's closed, but it's closed by way of them not endorsing that it exists.
I see.
And I mean, there are places that are complete washouts on it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not the safest. But
No.
Trevor and I did hike the upper portion down to the middle, and which is, I mean,
Yeah.
that was a day hike, I think, and not huge, but it was fun. And I just always thought I'd want to go back there and let her experience that.
Yeah. Well, we just keep going back. And now I have a travel budget that expects me to do so with the American Waldensian Society. So,
Beautiful. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
I
all
haven't been
right.
able to use it this last year.
I'll be back in a few.
Okay.
All right.
Goodness. I better talk. So Tim, can we test my PowerPoint out and video? So can we test the PowerPoint and video?
Absolutely.
You're going to have to allow me to share my screen, I think, and
You should be set up to share your screen.
okay, all right. So let's pretend I'm starting the PowerPoint.
You bet.
Can you see that?
Nope. So when you do that, there's
Yeah.
two little boxes down in the on the one. So when you open it up, it says share your screen. There's
Yeah,
two
and
little.
that's what I can't see. Where do I?
So it says share sound and optimize for video clip.
I cannot see that, Tim.
Okay, so go
Oh,
back.
wait, I've got it. Yep.
Yep.
There it is. Share screen.
And then down
share
in the
sound.
Yep, and optimize video clip.
Okay, good.
And now, yep, there you are.
All
Okay.
right. So there's my screen, and I'll do the slideshow thing. Let me try the
Yep.
try the video.
You bet.
If you are like
Oh, we
me,
get a
you
bra
have
commercial.
no
Excellent.
boobs. You would like to have boobs, but that's not in the cards for you.
I can't guarantee that won't happen.
Started loving you at night.
Okay, I'm just going to pause it there, and hopefully we won't have to go back to the bra commercial.
So I'm trying to remember what movie that is.
That's The Sound of Music.
Oh, it is? Okay. I was thinking,
Yeah.
I just watched this.
Uh-huh.
Yep, that's in the when they're out in the whatever that's called, little glass
Right.
house out in front.
Now,
Beautiful.
how can I get back to Zoom? I'm having trouble now.
So stop share will get rid of the screen totally, if that's what you want to do.
I can't even find the Zoom screen now. Oh, stop share. Okay,
Okay.
here I am. Okay. So when it's time to share the screen, I'll share the screen.
And if you want to see people on the side, once you pull up your screen share, if you move your cursor to the top, it'll give you something that it'll be like a little box that'll say view.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, if you hit view, you can do side-by-side speaker, which just becomes you. And you can do gallery view, and then you can kind of scroll between folks.
All right. You sound more optimistic than I feel, but you can coach me as we go.
Absolutely.
People
There-
are showing up.
There is grace.
Good. Well, if need be, I can do completely without technology, but it makes it a little more interesting.
So we were doing a funeral yesterday, and I had issues with my mic. So we tested my mic to make sure that we weren't going to have those issues.
Right.
I go up to speak, and the mic is like, and it's like, I don't think I'm hearing myself.
Of
So
course.
when I went back up the next time, I thought, I'm just going to test this out and make sure. And I mean, I checked to make sure the power was on, all those things, but it's still.
So are we completely on Zoom today, or are there people in person?
No, we are completely on Zoom. So
Okay.
when we did some classes where we had some people live and some people on Zoom, it made the ability to have dialogue.
Yeah.
We're just, our technology isn't set up in a way to really allow that to happen well.
Yeah.
So
So you can watch for questions and that kind of thing.
We need to have it.
Hello, everybody.
All right, so I guess we have one more minute here.
All right.
Up there, it just turned 11 o'clock. I'm surprised that I don't see my wife here, but she's coming.
Okay.
So friends who are already on, you've met Carol. You may have met Carol before. She has taught at Thornapple on a couple of different occasions. And one of those, probably the most talked about class was the class that you did on the Hallelujah course on Handel. So I just, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, at least you're a familiar name. And in addition to that, Carol and her husband Tom and I have known each other, and they're in our circle of friends, even though we don't get to see each other often. It's good to have you here. When Carol and I were talking, and I had, I always look at speakers and where different things that are in their list of things, knowing that I don't want to ask somebody in the middle of a school year to create something specifically catered for Thornapple. But I saw she had written the material for Kerygma on the book of Job. And I was thinking about our current reality in this world. And depending on how you've fared over the last year, you may be thinking that you've done a lot of suffering, or at least you've watched other people suffer. And I thought, I often hear people talk about Job, and I'm rarely happy with the way that we talk about Job. I feel like we try to identify with something and push something on Job that just isn't really quite part of the biblical story. So, in a selfish sort of way, I'm choosing this for you because this is the only week that I will be available. Well, we're not sure about that. We know that next Sunday will be en route. So other than the fact I'll get to watch it on video, and I'm not sure what the second Sunday will look like, but Carol will be with us for the next 3 weeks. I'm going to just turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. And it's great to be with Thornapple folks again. Everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you're wondering about the background for my screen, it's a meadow in northern Italy. I was on sabbatical last year from January through July and spent it in Italy. Most of it was spent locked down in a 2-room apartment in Rome, which is not quite what I had planned. But at this time of the year, last year, I was making my escape to the mountains in the north. And so I took this picture. Whenever I use it as my background, people say, we expect to see you running through the meadow, singing "The Hills Are Alive." And the irony is I'm actually going to try to play a clip from The Sound of Music today. So it's sort of part of the theme. All right, well, let's jump in. I'm going to try to share my screen. And I've got a little PowerPoint here. Let's do slideshow. There we go. All right, so you can see that? Yes? Tim, tell me if they can see that.
Yes, they can see it.
Great. So that's our topic for today. And this is the description. I don't know if you got to see this in advance, but this is what you're in for. Believers often look to the Bible's book of Job when they're wrestling with the question, why do bad things happen to good people? The character Job, after all, is a very good man who suffers in some of the very worst ways. So in this class, we'll explore what his story does and does not teach about the problem of suffering. And we'll also look at the ways that we can be faithful Christians even when we don't have all the answers. So that's the plan. And the plan for today in the first session is to cover just the first 3 chapters of the book under the heading, What Did I Do to Deserve This? You're probably familiar with the story, but in these chapters, we meet Job and his wife who lose everything, including their children, even though they've done nothing to deserve such a devastating loss. So in this session, we're going to be looking at the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities that the book of Job poses for for people of faith. All right, so we're going to try to ease into today's topic with that clip from The Sound of Music that I mentioned. And you can probably remember the scene where Julie Andrews sings the words, "Somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good." So as we watch that clip, I want you to be thinking about what are the assumptions behind that line. All right, so here we are, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer in the gazebo scene from The Sound of Music.
At the dinner table when you sat on that ridiculous pine cone.
What? I knew the first time you blew that silly whistle.
Oh, my love. For here you are, standing there, loving me. Whether or not you should.
So somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. So somewhere in my youth,
Oh, childhood.
I must have done something.
Ah, such a beautiful scene. All right, hang on a second. Full screen, here we go. All right, now I'm going to try to get back to my PowerPoint, but I'm not succeeding. There we go. All right. Current slide. Okay, so you've thought about it. It's such a beautiful scene from the movie, isn't it? I get swept up in it every time I watch it. And yet, at some point, even as a very young person, I remember thinking, I'm not sure the theology behind that song is quite right. Somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good. Hang on a second. What is the assumption behind that song? Anybody want to chime in? Tim, you have all the answers.
Well, so I think we often think that so we do something good happens to us. When we do something bad happens to us. And, you know, in our childhood logic, that's true because oftentimes when we did something bad did happen to us. So,
well, that's true. And that anticipates my next question. The assumption behind the song is good behavior gets rewarded. But the flip side of the assumption is bad behavior gets punished. And I guess what I'd like to ask all of you is what do you think of that? And does that fit with your experience? Tim, you've talked about how sometimes it does fit with your experience. You do something bad. You touch the hot stove when your mom has told you not to, and you get burned. So in that case, bad behavior gets punished. But yeah, now that you've all lived a few years in this world, does that fit with your experience, and why or why not? They're all thinking about their experiences.
I would say that, we've got enough dosage of the old Protestant guilt system around us that you kind of figure out that if you did something or something went wrong, you trace it back to, well, I probably shouldn't have done this, or I must not be doing this well, or I skipped church or something, along the line didn't happen the way it should.
There is a lot of that kind of thinking, and sometimes it's true, but have you ever had an experience where it just really wasn't true? Sometimes people suffer and they didn't do anything to deserve it, and then those equations get kind of uncomfortable. How many times have you sat in the lawyer's office or the emergency room and maybe said, what did I do to deserve this? And sometimes even those of us who know better still ask that question.
So I think, Carol, if I could interrupt, I think we have a great working example. Our son's mother-in-law was diagnosed several months ago with stage 4 lung cancer. She's an active woman, non-smoker, exercised regularly, someone who is diet conscious, and yet she ends up with a stage 4 diagnosis that then metastasizes to her brain and bones. And that's different than after, whatever hurricane or tornado, when someone goofy says, well, God had to wipe out New Orleans because of all the sin that goes on in New Orleans.
There's always somebody who's eager to jump on the talk shows with really questionable theology. And I guess part of what's important, I think, in studying the book of Job is that it really forces us to think hard about the assumptions behind that oversimplistic view of sin and suffering. Maybe sometimes there is a connection. There's enough in the Bible that suggests that, sometimes sin yields suffering, but not always. And this is the Bible's best example of one of those not always situations. So, all right, we've eased in. I want to move on to actually look at the book of Job now. Even though we haven't answered all those questions, we've at least raised them. So some people suggest that the theme of the book of Job is about why bad things happen to good people. And you can see why they might say that. Keep that one in the back of your mind. Another suggestion is that the book of Job is about the question, will human beings serve God if there's nothing in it for them? And that is actually a question we will encounter in chapter 1. But I'm going to suggest that even though those questions are obviously important for the book, they may just be sort of the presenting problems. That there may be another theme that hits the nail on the head a little bit better. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm going to keep you wondering about that. All right, before we actually start reading the book of Job, I want to ask a question that will prepare us to be better readers. What are we reading here? It's always a good question, even if we don't consciously think about it. We ask ourselves this anytime we pick up something to read. You pick up a treasurer's report or you pick up a romance novel. You have a different series of set of expectations. So I want us to come to the book with a smarter set of expectations by just asking, what are we reading here? Well, first we're reading a story that's as old as the hills. To say that this story of a righteous person who suffers is old is an understatement. Many ancient cultures have their own version of the Job story, and you can see why. It's a universal human experience. So it's really old, and versions of this story have been passed around orally before they even started to get written down. What else? It's a story that's a community project. And by that, I mean that the people of God, the community of faith, has been working on this project for a very long time. From the days when it was passed around as a story shared orally around the campfire to different editions that it went through before it took the shape that we're familiar with in the Bible. I could say more about that, but that's probably enough. And I'd say that it's a story that's true, though not necessarily historical. You can make up your own mind about that, but over the years of teaching this, I've found it's really helpful to bring a set of expectations to this book that don't demand that doesn't demand it to be absolutely historical, which isn't to say it's not a true story. I mean, you read a really good novel, you read A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, you put it down at the end and you say, wow, was that true? Well, is it historical? Well, it's set in an historical period, but that doesn't mean that all of these characters actually existed. So I guess that's kind of where I've come down on it. You can make up your own mind. I think it is a true story in the sense that it tells us something absolutely trustworthy about God's relationship with us in the world and what it means to live as a person of faith. And I believe it's absolutely inspired, but not necessarily historical. So just keep that in the back of your mind. You can take it or leave it as we go. All right. So we're going to read the prologue to the book now, which is the first 2 chapters. And I've labeled this upstairs, downstairs. You'll see why in a moment. Maybe you remember that old series, Upstairs, Downstairs. The kind of more recent version of it is Downton Abbey, focusing on what happens upstairs in the big manor house and then what happens to the characters downstairs, the servants. And there's a bit of that structure in the book of Job, and I've kind of tried to depict it graphically here. I'm not going to take time to read the entire book of Job. Obviously, we can't, but it's important to read the prologue, I think, because it sets everything up for the rest of the book. But I want to keep that upstairs, downstairs structure in our mind as we read. So, okay, the scene starts downstairs with the human characters. So let's read. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. And there were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. All right, so now we're at the end of the first downstairs scene. You've gathered some impressions of Job's character. I'll ask you about that in a moment. But let's move upstairs and see what's going on in the heavenly courts. starting with verse 6. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came among them. And by the way, I'll explain in a minute why I'm calling him the Satan. The Lord said to the Satan, "Where have you come from?" The Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then the Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to your face." The Lord said to the Satan, "Very well, all that he has is in your power, only do not stretch out your hand against him." So the Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. All right, that's the first upstairs scene. You've formed some impressions of those characters too, which may not be entirely comfortable, but again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go back downstairs to see what happens. Verse 13. One day, when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshiped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. All right, so let's just gather some first impressions here. What's your impression of Job after reading this first chapter? Anybody?
I feel like there's a humility to him.
Very much so. And a great deal of self-control too. I did not expect him to worship when he tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell down on the ground. That's pretty amazing. So, I mean, he's a righteous guy. He's very well-to-do. Yeah. I think one thing we might want to get clear, because Calvinists always have a problem with this. In order for this story to work, we have to take the Bible at its word when it says that Job is blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. And even God tells us in verse 8, the Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, blameless and upright." I think Christians of the Reformed persuasion are always quick to jump in and say, well, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. He wasn't perfect. Well, the story says he's blameless. And there's another thing to keep in mind. He's working with the Old Testament's way of dealing with sin. That is, when you sin, you offer sacrifice. And obviously, Job is very serious about atoning for his sins and even the sins of his children, the hypothetical sins of his children. He's running around sacrificing just in case they may have cursed God in their hearts. So he's taking full advantage of that sacrificial system. So when it says that he's blameless, I think we need to believe that. If we don't believe that, then the whole argument for the rest of the book is going to fall flat. So yeah, I would say just take the Bible's word on that. Okay, what about this Satan character? My version, the NRSV, has Satan capitalized like a proper name, but there's a little footnote that reflects the fact that in Hebrew, it's not Satan with a capital S, it's Ha-Satan, which is a kind of, it's almost like a position description. The idea of Satan with a capital S, a personified evil, really wasn't popular until the time between the Testaments. So it would be weird if we had Satan with a capital S here. I think the best way to describe this character is it's like well, it literally translates the accuser. He's kind of like a prosecuting attorney. His job is to, he's a member of the heavenly court, but his job is to go back and forth on the earth to see if people are naughty or nice, kind of like a sinister Santa Claus. And he's not the evil one so much as he's somebody who maybe enjoys his job a little too much. But again, if we read Satan with a capital S, it makes a lot of problems theologically that you can avoid if you just recognize that in the original context, he's the accuser. We don't have to like him, but that's his job. So, okay, what about God? Impressions of God from this chapter. Yeah. Anybody want to?
Sherry, I noticed that your mic was open before on one of the previous ones. Did you have a comment?
Well, the comment I was going to make is something Carol mentioned, and that was Job was, he knew what needed to be done for sins. And so, as she said, he was planning on, or he did sacrifice for his sons and daughters, his family, knowing that it was possible that they might have sinned.
Good. Give us one impression of God.
Are you talking to me to ask that question?
Well, yeah, as long as your mic is open. I mean, everybody else is kind of just lumps on the log right now. So
my impression of God is a God of love. That's it.
That's certainly the impression we get from the whole Bible. And I, for one, am glad that Job chapter 1 is not all we know about God, because I think the character of God in this first chapter is a little questionable. You know, he sort of lets himself get pushed around by this accuser character, paints himself into a corner by saying wonderful things about Job, and then the Satan comes in and sort of says, yeah, well, yeah.
Carol, he seems a little whimsical to me here.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Yeah, just easily.
That's
easily,
a good word.
Yeah, kind of easily. Like, I like the way you put it. God kind of painted himself into a corner, and then just kind of, okay, that's fine, go for it. You know, have your way with Job. It just seems kind of flippant at times, almost.
Yeah. Well, and it is awkward, isn't it? This idea that God and the Satan are up there kind of placing bets on whether or not Job will be faithful. A lot of people have felt the awkwardness of this chapter, but in some ways, it's the price of admission for the whole book. It may not be a picture that you're very comfortable with, but sometimes when my husband and I are watching television, I'll be raising logical objections to the plot of whatever it is we're watching. And he'll turn to me and he'll say, "It's a story," which puts me in my place. And I think that's sort of what we have to remember when we're reading this book too. It's a story. So let's just roll with the story. And our impressions of the characters, I think, will evolve as things go on. All right, I've got my eye on the clock, so we need to move on to scene 2. Let's see what happens upstairs with chapter 2, verse 1. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to the Satan, "Where have you come from?" The Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Now, up until this point, it's almost exactly like what we had in chapter 1. But here God adds, he still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Then the Satan answered the Lord, "Skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." Then the Lord said to the Satan, "Very well, he's in your power. Only spare his life." All right, here we go downstairs. So the Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd, that's a broken piece of pottery, with which to scrape himself, and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not the bad?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all the troubles that had come upon him, each of them set out from his home: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. And they met together to go and console and comfort him. But when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept aloud. They tore their robes and threw dust in the air upon their heads. All of these, by the way, signs of mourning. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. All right, let us do another character check here after we've read scene 2. Impressions of the 3 friends, at least so far. Pretty good at pastoral care, aren't they? They show up. They don't say much, but they're there for their friend. Would that they always kept their mouths shut, some people have said. We'll spend more time with these 3 guys next week. But so far, so good. What about anything more to add about Job's character in this scene?
He still didn't.
Integrity. You know,
Yeah.
I think that his integrity just continues to be in place.
He didn't badmouth God.
No, he still didn't badmouth God, which is pretty amazing. Although I did notice it said, "In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." You just sort of wonder what's going on internally, but he's still, yeah. Mrs. Job, it strikes me as so ironic that here we are on Mother's Day talking about Mrs. Job. And I think, yeah, we need to remember that Job's not the only one who's lost all his children. She's lost all her children too. And her reaction, of course, is very, very different from her husband's. Anybody have
There's just a raw honesty to her a little bit though too. I mean, it might be a little bit harsh what she says, the curse God and die part, but
Yeah.
she's just being honest with where she's at.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I too feel like she's really gotten a raw deal from the commentators over the years. Augustine called her the devil's helpmate. So I think we're too hard on her though, and I want to talk a little bit about Mrs. Job's attitude, especially as someone who was raised in the popular theology of the day. It's that theology we talked about earlier, that the assumption that obedience yields blessing and sin yields suffering. Now, put yourself in Mrs. Job's sandals here for a minute. She knows better than anybody that her husband is a righteous man. She's seen him going around offering these sacrifices, not only for himself, but just in case their children have sinned. And yet, what does she see now? She sees her husband, the righteous man, suffering. So it looks to her like these equations are a lie. It looks to her like obedience in this case has yielded suffering. And if that's the case, then no wonder she tells Job to curse God and die. This is a God that can't be trusted. I mean, I am imagining what she's thinking and feeling, but when I imagine this from her perspective, I have a lot of sympathy for her for saying curse God and die. And that is one of the options when we get into a situation like this, just to give up on God. And maybe you've been in a situation where you've been tempted to do that too. Job offers us another option, which is to remain faithful to God, even though he's got to have some serious questions. And there's a lot he doesn't understand. And the whole rest of the book will, I think, force us to kind of wrestle between those two options: give up on God or trust God even when we don't understand. So now I want to ask a question that, if you're old enough, will remind you of Watergate days. What do the characters know, and when do they know it? This is a helpful question all through the Bible. Whenever you're reading a Bible story, ask yourself this. So I'm interested in what the characters know and when they know it about this heavenly wager that's going on upstairs. And now, when does God know about that? Well, God obviously knows about it the whole time. When does the Satan know about this heavenly bet? Well, the Satan knows about it the whole time. He's part of it. When does Job know about this heavenly bet? He doesn't. He doesn't know about it. Mrs. Job doesn't know about it. The three friends know nothing about what's gone on upstairs. And that's part of the reason I've been so deliberate in calling your attention to the upstairs, downstairs structure. The human characters in this book don't know anything about what's gone on upstairs. And that's going to become really important as they wrestle with why these awful things have befallen Job. The friends next week, preview of coming attractions, if you can call it that, are going to suggest that, somewhere in your youth or childhood, Job, you must have done something bad. You must have done something to deserve this. But of course, we know that's not the case. We know it as the readers because this omniscient narrator has let us peek into the heavenly courts. So we know that in this case, there's a righteous man who's suffering who did nothing to deserve it. But it's just important to keep in mind that we as readers know more than the human characters do. I hope that makes sense. I went kind of fast, but it really does make a difference for how we read the rest of the book. Keep in mind what the characters know and when they know it about that heavenly bet. All right. Time for a theme check. I would like to suggest that the central theme of the book is not why bad things happen to good people. I agree that's the presenting problem. But just like when you walk into the emergency room with a cough, the cough might be the presenting problem, but the big diagnosis that the doctor gives you later may be something completely different. Maybe you have pneumonia, maybe you have bronchitis, maybe you have allergies. So in this case, why bad things happen to good people is the presenting problem. But I would suggest that the theme of the book of Job is the limits of human wisdom. The limits of human wisdom. And you see how that goes along with the upstairs, downstairs thing. Part of what the book of Job explores is how can we be faithful people with limited knowledge? Only God knows the way to wisdom. But we have to sort of make our way in this life without being able to always have all the answers. Maybe you do have all the answers. If you do, I'm suspicious of you. But there are always plenty of people around who claim that they have the answers. But all right. So in chapter 3, which we won't spend too much time on, Job undergoes sort of it's not a personality transplant, but I think we move from prose to poetry and we find out what's going on internally. What's Job thinking? He comes out cursing. He still doesn't curse God like his wife told him to do, but he's going to curse the day of his birth. It says, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Job said, let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said a man-child is conceived. So not only does he curse the day of his birth, but then he goes farther and curses the day of his conception. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, or light shine on it. He just goes on. Why did I not die at birth? Come forth from the womb and expire? Why were there knees to receive me, or breasts for me to suck? Now I would be lying down and quiet. I would be asleep, and then I'd be at rest with kings and counselors of the earth. So he's saying, if I were dead, at least, I'd be in good company, because even kings die. And then skipping ahead to verse 20, why is light given to one in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it does not come, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave. So it's relentless. I remember hearing a sermon on this chapter. It was a sermon series that several of us did years ago on the book of Job. John Hesslink, Alan Verhey, Dennis Foskel, just, I don't know how I got in that group, but everybody took a passage and we preached through the book of Job. Alan Verhey got chapter 3, and he read that whole chapter. And when he got to the end of it, he said, this is the word of the Lord. And there was dead silence. And Third Reformed in Holland's a pretty well-trained congregation. You say this is the word of the Lord, usually they respond right on cue. Thanks be to God. But that day, after this chapter, I don't think they knew what to think. And so they were just silent. So I'm wondering if it has pummeled you into silence as well. What are your impressions of this chapter? Are you glad it's in the Bible? Why or why not? None of you are going to come back next week because I'm putting you on the spot. Sorry about that.
I was going to say this whole first 3 chapters is probably the closest the Bible comes, I think, to almost a Greek mythology feel, where you've got these gods bouncing back and forth between heaven and earth, making plans, and you've got the protagonist on the earth, wondering what's going on and trying to, come to terms with it. So yeah, it's just got a whole different feel for me.
It really does. And I guess part of the reason I am still glad it's in the Bible, it makes Job feel more like a person I know. But I'm also glad that verse in there, why is light given to one in misery and life to the bitter in soul who long for death, but it does not come? I felt like that sometimes, sitting by the bedside of someone who's really suffering. So yeah, it's a really tough chapter. And you're really not going to want to come back next week after ending with chapter 3. But just let me give you a little indication of what's ahead for next time. We're going to cover lots more chapters all the way through chapter 28. And we'll meet Job's friends who encourage him by suggesting that his suffering is the result of some secret sin. Yeah, it's a section of the book that gives us permission to ask why, but cautions us against claiming to know more than we do. So that's pretty much what I've got for this week. Tim, it looks to me like we are out of time. So I'd like to end with a prayer and maybe suggest that you save your questions and come back with them next week. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds reasonable to me. Before you pray, and while people are still tuned in, so next week is the day that we honor Nancy Norton in ministry. And there's going to be some sort of a reception following worship, which means that does your schedule allow you to start 15 minutes later next week, Carol?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let's plan on not feeling like you need to rush off to get back to Job, but let's plan on an 11:15 start, but also a 12 o'clock finish for next week, okay? I think that gives breathing room for everybody to do what we need to do. So thank you, Carol, for being here this week and the weeks to come, and I'll let you pray us out.
You're welcome. And by the way, as you anticipate next week, believe it or not, this is a really fun section of the book. And it actually is quite funny at points. It's a difficult thing to believe about the book of Job, that it could be fun or even funny, but I promise if you come back, there will be a few laughs we can share. All right, let's pray. Gracious God, there is so much we don't understand. Help us to trust you even when we don't understand, especially when we don't understand. We pray in the name of Jesus, who loves us and walks with us in our suffering as well as our joy. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody.
Go in peace.
Go in peace.